I'd like to share with you two ways of using a cutting mat and a ruler to cut. So the first way uses the lines on your cutting mat as well as the ruler to cut. The second way just uses the ruler. And I bounce back and forth between these methods depending on what I'm cutting and my mood. I think it's useful to be familiar with both methods so you can use them as needed. So for starters, I'm going to show you the method that uses the lines on the cutting mat. And I have this piece of fabric that I want to cut into 3-inch squares. So for starters, it already has a straight edge. So I'm going to align the fabric here, the straight edge, with a horizontal line on my cutting mat. And I see that this fabric also has a straight edge across the top. So I'll scooch it down so that it's aligning with both of those lines, a horizontal and a vertical. And there we go. And now to cut 3-inch squares, I'm going to put my ruler like so, and I'm able to align it with the lines on my cutting mat both above and below. I see that you can't see below, so let me just shift this up real quick. Here we go. All right, so So I can line my cutting mat like this, and I'm using the line above and below, and that makes it really clear to me that I've got a nice 3-inch piece. So I'll cut there. And probably because I'm demonstrating, I actually noticed that it shifted a little bit over here, so I can actually move my cutting mat, my cutting ruler like so, and make another cut. So even if I didn't have a straight line, that would have been a way to create a straight line over here. So now I have a 3-inch piece, and without moving my fabric at all, I see that I have it lined up right there. So to make a 3-inch square, I can put my ruler like so, and then again down here. And if I had a long strip of fabric, this would be a quick way to keep cutting squares. And as long as I don't move my fabric, it's pretty quickly to keep going and to line up my ruler with the lines on the cutting mat. So that's actually the way I most often do it. Whoops. Okay. And you might have noticed that as I was cutting, I had the fabric that I was wanting to use exposed. I had it over here, and the ruler was on top of the fabric that I wasn't using yet. Some people worry that, while they're cutting, they might let their ruler veer off and cut into the good fabric that they wanted to use. If that's a problem for you, then the simple solution is just to orient your fabric the other way. So I could have lined it up like this. And of course, I'm right-handed, so I apologize if you're left-handed, you'll need to reverse the directions. But for a right-handed person, if I have my excess fabric going to the right, then when I place my ruler and line up my ruler again with the lines on the cutting mat here and here, this time if I were to cut a 3-inch pass, you see that the fabric I want to use is covered by the ruler. So that protects it from getting cut. So I would cut this line, I would move this fabric away, and then I would continue to cut by placing my ruler like so, cutting this way, and again that 3-inch square was protected while I cut. And I would just continue like so. So either way you do it, whether you like to have your fabric exposed or covered by your ruler, either way will work with this method. Okay, so the second totally different way of cutting does not use the measuring lines on your cutting mat, but rather just the ruler. So here I have a random piece of fabric that I also want to cut into 3-inch squares for my turn dash block. And actually up here, I wouldn't call that exactly straight. There's no real totally straight area, so this is a good time to demonstrate how to use just my ruler. I'm going to place my ruler so that it's cutting a piece that's slightly larger than 3 inches. See, 1, 2, 3, and a little bit. There's that little bit extending past the 3-inch mark. So I want to make a 3-inch square, so I'm going to start with a slightly bigger piece. And now I can flip this fabric around and use my ruler again, aligning the 3-inch line exactly with that cut edge I just made. So I lined the 3-inch line on my ruler, like 1, 2, 3, right like so, with the cut edge I just made, and I cut again. So now I have a perfectly 3-inch wide piece. I can turn it, and I could cut a little more than 3 inches. This time I would line my ruler with the bottom to make sure that this cut that's going up is totally perpendicular with one of those previously cut straight edges. And see, notice I did 1, 2, 3 and a little bit, because now I'm going to do my 4th and final cut like so. This time I rotate around, I line it with that 3-inch mark. For extra credit, if I'm being really careful, I could also line it with the bottom mark. That's really not necessary since we already know this one's perpendicular. So cut like so, and I have a 3-inch square. I think that is a little more time consuming. If I wanted to cut a lot of 3-inch squares out of this, I'd probably go to the trouble of aligning my fabric, you know, with a cut edge. I'm sorry, with a cutting line, like we already showed earlier. And I'd go like this, and then, so this is the first method again, just kind of demonstrating that for me at least, it tends to be faster. And now I have, you know, a 3-inch square. But the way that uses just the ruler is handy and faster in different situations. For example, here's a random long strip I have. So I want to make a 1.5 inch strip. It'll be faster to just use my ruler to line it up, to line up with the edge of that strip and cut and create a 1.5 inch strip that way, rather than having first tried to line up a long strip with a long line on my cutting mat. But the way that ruler only cutting is super powerful is this: when you're trying to cut a piece strip or to square the edge of something that's already pieced. Because when you do this, you can line your ruler not only with, you know, a straight edge, but also with the seam line of what you're cutting, making sure that your cut is perpendicular to the seam line or parallel to the seam line, depending on what you're going for. So this is actually another part of the churn dash block where you have to sew 2 long strips together and then segment them. And I want to segment this into 2.5 inch lengths. So I'm going to use my ruler. Again, notice this is placed on my cutting mat like willy-nilly. I'm not lining it up with the lines on my cutting mat. I'm only using the lines of my ruler as a guide. So I've lined up my ruler here at 2.5 inches, 1, 2.5 right here. And then I'm going to line up one of the lines going this way on my ruler with the seam line. So I'll slide this up so that in this case, this line right here is right on top of my seam line. So now when I cut, I know not only is it going to be 2.5 inches wide, but my cut is definitely going to be totally perpendicular to the seam line. So I'd cut like so, and then I could do another one, and I could work all the way across in this manner. And each time I'm assured that I'm getting that seam perpendicular to my cut. So this is very handy in different situations when you're to make your finished product more accurate. And especially, I use it a lot with improv piecing. With improv piecing, you might have scenes going every random which way, but you kind of want to keep them like perpendicular or parallel to each other if you're not going for wonky improv. And so using your ruler as the guide and using your ruler to match the seams at the same time can be super handy. All right, I hope that is helpful.